Are you ready to discover the mystery behind an abandoned house in a seemingly perfect condominium? The Oliveira family thought they were starting a new life, but little did they know that the house next door held dark secrets. Secrets that should never have been awakened. Mysterious noises, disturbing whispers, and a portal between two worlds. A journey of psychological and supernatural terror that would change their lives forever. Do you want to know what happened to them and the terrible fate of those who move into the same condominium? Click now and dive into this chilling story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales like this one. And if you liked it, leave a like and share it with your friends. You could be the next to find out what's lurking next door. Moving always comes with promises of new beginnings. But for the Oliveira family, fate held a dark secret. While the car was parked at the condominium gate, Clara, the eldest daughter, was the first to notice something strange. The house next to the new residence looked abandoned. The windows darkened and the garden overgrown as if no one had lived there for years. Parents, Fernando and Luisa, said it was probably just an unoccupied house, but Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at it. "Let's go in soon," her younger brother Davy suggested, eager to explore the new house. When the family finally entered, the atmosphere was welcoming, cozy, completely different from the deserted neighborhood that surrounded them. The day passed quickly, between moving boxes, nervous laughter, and the feeling of newness that comes with a new home. But as soon as night fell, a heavy atmosphere took over the place. Clara was the first to hear the noises. They were low, drawn-out whispers coming from the house next door, which she swore was empty. Fernando, trying to calm his children, said it was just wind. But the whispers intensified, turning into knocks that seemed to follow a slow, precise rhythm. Davy, just 8 years old, began to cry quietly, hugging a teddy bear. "Dad, there's someone there. I know there's someone." Clara insisted. Discomfort grew. Fernando decided to go next door, but when he reached the door, a cold sensation paralyzed him. Without the courage to go in, he returned home, trying to stay calm. That night, neither of them slept properly. What was that sound? Why did it only start at night? Luisa, increasingly restless, began to wonder if the move had been the right choice. Condominium seemed perfect during the day. At night, it turned into something unknown and frightening. And the house next door seemed to be the epicenter of a mystery that no one wanted to unravel. The next day, Fernando decided to ask the concierge about the house next door. Joaquim, the elderly doorman, lowered his gaze when Fernando mentioned the house. "Sir, some places hold stories that shouldn't be told," he said evasively. "But you're safe here. Don't worry." The vague answer only increased Fernando's curiosity. He insisted, asking why the house was so abandoned. But Joaquim just shook his head and returned to his post. Back at home, Fernando told his family what he had discovered, which was practically nothing. Clara, however, wasn't satisfied with the explanation. In the afternoon, she decided to explore the condominium on her own, and as she walked through the empty streets, she felt that sensation of being watched again. She knew something was wrong in that place. She couldn't explain what. When she returned home, she found her mother sitting in the kitchen, restless, watching the horizon through the window. "What's wrong, Mom?" Clara asked. Luisa just sighed. Clara asked, but Luisa just sighed. "I don't know, dear. I feel like this place is watching us, like we're intruders here." That night, the sounds from next door came again. This time they were louder, more intense. Clara got out of bed and went to the window. To her surprise, there was a dim light on inside the house next door. Faint glow, which seemed to pulse like a dying flame. She woke up her father, who reluctantly went to the window too. "There's no one there, Clara. It must be a reflection," he said, but his voice didn't hide his uncertainty. The mystery of the house next door was beginning to erode the family's tranquility. And as the nights passed, the noises became louder and louder, as if something or someone was trying to communicate with them. Fear and curiosity mixed together, making the atmosphere inside the house increasingly tense. They knew they had to find out what was going on, but none of them were prepared for what they would find. On the third night, the noises changed. They were no longer whispers or knocks, but continuous scratching, as if fingernails were being dragged along the walls of the house next door. Clara was the first to hear it, waking up in the middle of the night, her eyes wide. The house was colder than usual, and the sound seemed closer. Fernando also woke up, this time determined to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and, despite Luisa's protests, set off in the direction of the house next door. When he reached the door of the strange house, Fernando noticed that the doorknob was as cold as ice, even on that warm summer's night. He hesitated, but pushed the door, which curiously opened easily. The interior was completely empty, furniture covered in dust and cobwebs, as if no one had been in there for decades. The scratches continued, coming from inside the walls, as if something was stuck. Suddenly, flashlight began to flicker, and a shadow moved quickly in the corner of the room. Fernando, paralyzed with fear, didn't know if he had really seen something or if his mind was playing tricks on him. Desperate, he returned home without looking back. "Everything is empty," he said to his family, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. But his eyes showed that he knew something was wrong. That night, Fernando locked all the doors and windows, but the sound of scratching continued until dawn. Something was changing. The mystery of the house next door was slowly invading their lives, and the silence the house maintained during the day was no longer enough to disguise the presence of the inexplicable. The next day, Clara decided to search the city archives for any clues about the condominium's past. There was something no one was telling us. Why was that house abandoned? And why did Joaquim seem so nervous whenever the subject came up? After a few hours in the local library, Clara finally found what she was looking for. An old news report from 30 years ago about a tragedy that had occurred in the house next door to hers. The report described a mysterious fire that destroyed the house, taking an entire family with it. What was most disturbing, however, was the testimony of the neighbors at the time. They all claimed to have heard whispering and banging in the house for months before the fire. No one knew what had caused the fire. The house was left intact, a silent memorial to an unsolved tragedy. When Clara read this, the chill she felt when looking at the house for the first time made sense. Back at the condominium, Clara told her family what she had discovered, and panic set in. Luisa began to cry, feeling that the decision to move there had been a terrible mistake. "We have to get out of here," she said, but Fernando hesitated. They had invested all their savings in that house. They couldn't just leave. But Clara was convinced that the place was dangerous, and the behavior of the house next door was proving it. That night, the sounds didn't just come from next door. They were inside their house. When the sounds began to intensify, Fernando and Luisa realized that Clara was right. Something was very wrong there, but it was too late to escape. The knocks, the whispers, and now footsteps coming from upstairs all blended together in terrifying chaos. Fernando tried to calm the family down, but he himself was on the verge of collapse. The lights in the house began to flicker, and a feeling of oppression overtook everyone. Suddenly, Davi began to speak in a voice that wasn't his. "They're here," he said, his eyes fixed on something no one else could see. "They never left." Clara screamed. Fernando knew what he had to do. The house next door wasn't just haunted by ghosts, by something much worse, something that had never left. The fire 30 years ago was no accident. It was a family's desperate attempt to escape the same fate that was now befalling them. When Fernando ran to get Davy out of the house, the door locked itself, as if an invisible force was controlling everything. Terror gripped the family, and Fernando realized that the only way out of that place was to face whatever was there. He went back next door, where he found an old diary hidden under the floorboards. It was the diary of the family who had died in the fire, and it contained detailed instructions on how to deal with the entity that haunted the condominium. With the diary in his hands, Fernando was able to perform the ritual described in the pages. The sound of knocking and whispering ceased. The air remained heavy. The entity hadn't disappeared completely. It had just fallen asleep again. As the Oliveira family left the condominium that same evening, certainty came over Clara. The evil was far from being destroyed. It was only waiting for its next victim. The days following the Oliveira family's escape were dark and full of tension. The trauma followed them like a persistent shadow. Fernando and Luisa, in particular, struggled to keep up appearances, trying to return to normality in a new apartment they had temporarily rented in another city. However, the nights were a real nightmare. Fernando would wake up sweating, reliving the sound of the beats and the incessant whispers. Luisa developed an irrational fear of any nocturnal noise. Even the mere sound of the wind hitting the windows made her cringe. Clara, although she tried to be strong, couldn't forget what David had said in that unknown voice. The words they never left kept echoing in her mind. Davy, for his part, remembered nothing. But the boy had changed. The smile that used to be constant on his face had disappeared, and now he always seemed distant, staring into the void as if something was watching him from afar. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was in short, disconnected sentences. Luisa, worried, took him to doctors, but no one could explain the boy's behavior. Maybe it's just the trauma, they said. But Clara knew it wasn't just that. While the family tried to rebuild their lives, they also struggled to bury the past, to pretend that none of it had ever happened. Clara couldn't let it go. She felt that something terrible was yet to come, as if that house and what they had experienced there had not completely abandoned them. The fear they carried wasn't just psychological. Something deeper and darker was rooted in each of them. And Clara, more than anyone, sensed the imminent danger. A few months later, a new family moved into the same condominium. Freitas, a family of 3, seemed happy with the house they had obtained, at a price well below market value. Eduardo, his wife Marina, and their young daughter Sofia arrived excited for what they believed would be the perfect fresh start. As soon as they moved in, they were greeted by Joaquim, the doorman, who watched them with the same cautious look as always, a look that hid old secrets. He offered to help, but just as he had done with the Oliveira family, he said little about the house next door. Eduardo found it strange that the condominium always seemed so empty, but he didn't take much notice. Marina, however, soon noticed the strange feeling that surrounded the place at night. At first, there were small shivers that she felt as she crossed the hallway. Sofia, curiously, started waking up crying in the middle of the night, saying that people were whispering too loudly. When Marina asked who she was referring to, Sofia pointed to the wall that divided her house from the one next door. The same place where, in the past, Clara had heard the same whispers. Unlike the Oliviers, the Freitas tried to ignore the signs. Marina thought it was just adaptation to a new place, and Eduardo, always skeptical, refused to believe in anything supernatural. However, on the third night, Sofia disappeared from her room. Marina panicked when she realized that the window was open. There was no sign of the girl. Desperate, they began to search the entire condominium. That's when Joaquim, the doorman, revealed the secret he'd been keeping for so long. This house, not just a house, it's a door. Joaquim finally told what he knew. The entity that inhabited the house next door was not just a ghost. Decades ago, long before the condominium was built, that place was known as the Threshold House. An occult group used to meet there, performing ancient rituals to open a portal between the world of the living and the world of lost souls. The entity that manifested in the house was a guardian of that portal, an ancient force called to protect and control anyone who dared to cross from one side to the other. Something went wrong. In one of the rituals, the leader of the group, overcome by greed to control the other side, lost control, and the portal opened uncontrollably, trapping the souls of those in the house and leaving the guardian unbound. Since then, the house has been condemned, like an open wound between two worlds, attracting new residents and feeding off the fear and life it found there. The fire that destroyed the house years ago had been an attempt to isolate the evil, but it had never been completely banished. The souls of the portal's victims were trapped, invisible presences, beating the entity's power, and anyone who got too close would end up feeling the effect. While Joaquim was explaining to Eduardo and Marina, Clara, who had continued her research into the condominium's past, discovered something alarming. The entity was still active, and any new resident who entered the house would be the next target. Desperate, she rushed to the condominium to warn the new family, fearing that the same fate that had almost destroyed her life would befall them. While Clara was returning to the condominium to warn the Freitas, something strange began to happen to Davy. He started talking in his sleep, mumbling words in a language no one knew. Louisa went into his room one night and found him drawing strange symbols on the walls. It was as if he was being controlled by an invisible force. The entity that had touched them in the past had not disappeared. It was slowly returning to complete what it had started. Perhaps he had been chosen as the next portal and, without anyone knowing, the entity was using him to return. The nightmare next door was far from over. Clara knew she had to act fast. If she couldn't save Davy and his new family, the cycle of horror would continue indefinitely. Clara arrived at the Freitas condominium in the middle of the night, determined to end the cycle of terror that surrounded the place. When she entered the Freitas house, she found Marina and Eduardo terrified. They hadn't heard from Sofia for hours, and the panic was clear in their eyes. Clara knew what she had to do: confront the entity directly. With the help of the diary she had found in the abandoned house months before, Clara and Joaquim began the final ritual to close the portal once and for all. The entity resisted, causing the walls of the house to shake and the whispers to turn into terrifying screams. Eduardo was thrown against the wall, and Clara felt the floor give way beneath her feet. But with one last effort, she pronounced the final words of the ritual. Silence fell abruptly. In the house next door, completely quiet for the first time in years. When the ritual ended, Sofia was found in the basement of the house, unconscious but alive. The entity had been banished, but Clara knew that this was temporary. The portal was closed, but the scar would remain. The confrontation with the entity brought temporary peace, but Clara knew that evil never disappeared completely. The connection to David still remained a mystery. And although the family had survived, they would never be the same. Now the weight of the past and the entity that guarded the portal followed them like a shadow. What Clara didn't know was that, at some point, the cycle could begin again. And next time, they might not be so lucky.